I used to think perfection was something you could build, like a room with no corners left unfinished, no light leaking through the cracks. My name is Ethan Morgan, and for more than a decade, I believed I had done exactly that. My wife, Claire, and I built a quiet, elegant life together in Boston. I worked as an interior designer. She taught communication at a prestigious university. We had no children by choice, and our days were filled with soft routines that felt permanent. Morning coffee in the kitchen bay window, weekend hikes in the White Mountains, and art exhibits where we'd whisper our thoughts like curators of our own small museum. It was on a mild night in May that everything started to tilt. The city smelled like rain and lilacs when Claire came home later than usual. She didn't offer her usual smile, didn't kiss my cheek, didn't even take off her coat. Instead, she stood by the door, her eyes somewhere far away, and said, quietly but clearly, "I need to know who I am without you." At first, I laughed. I thought it was exhaustion talking, or maybe something she'd picked up from a lecture on self-discovery. But the silence that followed was heavy, like furniture left in an empty house. I asked if something had happened at work, if she was upset with me, if we could talk about it. She just shook her head and said she needed space. That word, space, echoed in my mind long after she went upstairs. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of zippers and drawers. Claire was packing. 2 suitcases, a box of books, her laptop bag. She didn't look angry. She didn't look sad. Just resolved. She said she had signed a short-term lease on an apartment in Cambridge and that she'd be in touch. I stood in the doorway, speechless, holding my coffee as if the warmth could keep me from freezing inside. When the door closed behind her, the silence left in her wake was deafening. Days turned into weeks. I tried to rationalize it, midlife crisis, burnout, an academic sabbatical gone emotional. But then I noticed the details that didn't fit the pattern. She texted less and less. Her voice on the phone was colder, her sentences shorter. When she came by the house to pick up her mail, she avoided my eyes. There was a faint trace of a perfume I didn't recognize, something rich, musky, not the floral scent she always wore. And once, while cleaning out her old desk, I found a receipt for a boutique hotel in Providence dated months before she left. My chest tightened, but I told myself not to spiral. People take trips for work. People change perfumes. People drift. Still, I couldn't stop replaying her words. I need to know who I am without you. It felt rehearsed, polished, like a line she'd already tested somewhere else. At night, I'd sit on our couch, staring at the empty space where she used to read. The walls, once alive with her laughter, now felt like witnesses to something unsaid. I caught myself checking her social media, looking for signs of her life, her new routines. Nothing, just silence. I began losing track of days, surviving on coffee and habit. Then one evening, a small but sharp moment changed everything. A colleague of hers, someone I'd met once at a faculty party, accidentally mentioned that Claire had recently returned from a conference in Chicago with another professor. "You must be proud of her," he said casually, "the way she's networking with Lucas Gray." That name stuck with me. Lucas Gray, a name that shouldn't have meant anything, but suddenly did. That night, I opened my laptop and typed Lucas Gray, theater director, Boston University. His photo appeared, a charismatic man with salt and pepper hair and a disarming smile. A visiting lecturer, a name connected to several art festivals across the country, and a list of upcoming projects, including one in Chicago. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. A strange calm came over me, the kind you feel right before a storm hits. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. But deep down, I knew the answer wasn't something I could ignore anymore. That was the night I decided to find out the truth. Not through guesses or suspicions, but through proof. If Claire had built a life outside of ours, I needed to see it with my own eyes. And that's how I ended up dialing the number of a private investigator named Neil Carter, a man who specialized in uncovering the things people tried hardest to hide. Neil Carter wasn't what I expected. When I met him in a quiet cafe near Copley Square, he looked more like a retired history teacher than a private investigator. Gray blazer, wire-rimmed glasses, and a voice so calm it made lies sound polite. He didn't ask me why I wanted the truth. He simply said, "You think she's seeing someone?" It wasn't a question. I nodded. He took out a notebook, wrote Claire's name, occupation, and where she lived. "If there's something to find," he said, "I'll find it." His tone wasn't cold, but clinical, like he'd done this 100 times. I signed the paperwork and left the cafe with a strange mix of guilt and relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was doing something, like I was reclaiming control of the story that had left me behind. The next few days dragged on like wet sand. Every sound in the house felt louder without Claire's presence. The ticking of the wall clock, the creak of the stairs, the soft hum of the refrigerator. I threw myself into work, redesigning a client's penthouse in Beacon Hill, but my focus shattered every time my phone buzzed. When Neil finally called, his voice was steady as ever. "I have something," he said. "You might want to sit down." He sent the photos that evening. I opened them one by one, each one taking a piece of air from my lungs. Claire, sitting across from Lucas Gray at a restaurant I knew, Bistro du Midi, just a few blocks from our first apartment. Claire, walking beside him through a park, her head tilted toward him in that soft way she used to tilt toward me. Then the third photo, Claire and Lucas checking into a hotel in Providence. Same weekend, she'd told me, she was presenting at a media research workshop. I stared at the screen for a long time. My first instinct was denial. This could be misinterpreted, it could be professional, it could be nothing. But Neil's report left no room for imagination. The dates, the locations, the hotel records. It had been going on for over 2 years. 2 years of shared dinners, private trips, stolen weekends. All while I believed she was buried in research. I remember feeling a strange duality. Rage, yes, but also numbness. The kind that keeps you from screaming. I went to bed that night without turning off the lights. Every shadow on the wall seemed to move, as if the house itself was uneasy. The next morning, I drove to Cambridge, parked a few blocks from Claire's apartment, and just watched. I don't know what I was hoping for. Maybe a confrontation, maybe a miracle. But when I saw her walk out, laughing into her phone, wearing the same coat she'd worn on our anniversary, I couldn't move. For a moment, I thought she saw me. But she didn't. She just crossed the street and disappeared into a cafe, her laughter fading like a song I wasn't meant to hear anymore. Neil kept sending updates. Chicago, New York, little details that confirmed what I already knew. Each report arrived like a small funeral notice, and I read them all. Somewhere between the disbelief and the bitterness, something inside me began to shift. I realized I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want her back. What I wanted was the truth laid bare, so I could finally let go. One evening, Neil asked if I wanted him to continue. I said no. "That's enough," I told him. "I've seen what I needed to see." But I wasn't finished. There was one more thing I had to do, something final. A quiet end to the noise. That night, I printed every photograph, every receipt, every timestamp. I placed them neatly inside a manila envelope and set on a coffee table in our living room. The same table where we used to drink wine and talk about our plans for the future. I didn't know exactly how the confrontation would go, but I knew I couldn't avoid it anymore. When the clock struck 9, I texted her. "Come home," I wrote. "We need to talk." And then I waited, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that had already ended, though neither of us had said it out loud yet. The night Claire came home, Boston was wrapped in rain. The kind that turned the streetlights into halos and made the city look softer than it really was. I sat in the living room, the envelope on the table between my hands. Inside it, our marriage dissected and dated. Proof that love, even the kind you swear will last forever, can rot quietly in the dark. When I heard the door unlock, I didn't move. Claire stepped inside, shaking off her umbrella, her eyes flickering with surprise when she saw me waiting. "Ethan," she said, hesitant, "you scared me. Why are you sitting here in the dark?" I nodded toward the table. "Because I need you to see something." She looked down. The envelope, the stack of photos spilling out like confessions. Her hands trembled as she reached for them, and I saw the exact moment she realized what they were. The color drained from her face. "Already know?" I said. "I know about him. I know about everything." The silence that followed was suffocating. She didn't deny it at first. She just stood there, breathing shallow, eyes darting around the room, as if the walls could save her. Then, finally, the words came out. "It's not what you think." But I laughed. I actually laughed. "Then tell me what I'm supposed to think, Claire. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like betrayal." Her voice cracked. "It wasn't about you, Ethan. It was about me. I lost myself in our life and who we became. Lucas, he made me feel alive again. There was the cliche I never thought I'd hear in my own home. He made me feel alive again." The words hit harder than the pictures. I wanted to shout, to break something, to shake her until the truth spilled out differently. But instead, I sat there, calm and deliberate. I slid 2 envelopes across the table. "This one," I said, "is the divorce agreement. The other is a copy of the report I sent to the university." Her eyes widened. "You didn't." "I did," I replied quietly. "Your relationship violates university ethics. You know that as well as I do." She started to cry, not the soft kind, but the kind that shakes the whole body. For a moment, I almost reached out, but my hand stopped midair. There was a time when her tears could move mountains in me. That time was gone. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "But you did," I said. "And you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed the version of us that I fought to believe in." She knelt beside the couch, still crying, begging for one more chance. But I was already gone. My body was there, but everything that made me her husband had already left. I watched her gather the papers, the photos, the shards of our life, and I realized I felt nothing. No rage, no grief, just a hollow quiet, like standing in an empty theater after the final curtain falls. When she finally walked out that night, I didn't follow. I just sat there, listening to the rain hit the windows, the sound echoing in the spaces where love used to live. In the days that followed, the fallout was brutal. The university launched an internal review. Lucas Gray resigned before they could fire him, his reputation in the theater community collapsing overnight. Claire was asked to step down gracefully. I heard those words through mutual friends. How polite institutions can sound when they're cleaning up disgrace. By the end of the month, she moved out completely. No goodbyes, no final conversation, just a key left in an envelope by the door. It was strange. For years, I'd imagined losing her as the end of everything. But when it actually happened, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Still, peace doesn't erase memories. At night, I'd dream of her voice, her laughter, her scent, and wake up with that old ache in my chest. Yet even that pain felt necessary, like a scar that proves the wound has finally closed. What I didn't know then was that this was only the first quiet step toward rebuilding my life. The destruction was complete, but from it, something new was waiting to emerge. After the divorce papers were signed, life felt like a long corridor with every door locked except one, the one that led forward. I moved out of our house in Beacon Hill and into a smaller apartment overlooking the Charles River. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in 11 years, I chose the furniture without asking anyone's opinion. The walls were bare at first, just white and echoing, but I liked the silence. It was honest. The first few months were survival by routine. Work, gym, coffee, sleep, repeat. My studio, which had once been a quiet side project, became my refuge. I poured everything into it: color, texture, design. Clients noticed. "There's something different in your work lately," one of them said. "More emotion." I didn't tell him that the emotion came from watching my life burn down and realizing I was still standing in the ashes. News about Claire reached me through whispers. She had resigned from the university to focus on independent research. Lucas Gray's career had collapsed under the weight of scandal. His latest production was canceled before opening night. I didn't celebrate it, but I didn't pity them either. Actions have consequences. That was the truth I clung to when the loneliness crept in. Sometimes, late at night, I catch myself scrolling through old photos. There she was, smiling on a mountain trail, paint on her fingers from the time she tried to redecorate the kitchen. It hurt, but not like before. The pain had edges now, defined, containable. It reminded me that I had once loved someone enough to be shattered by her. One afternoon, while cleaning the studio, I found an old sketchbook from the early days of our marriage. Inside were drawings of our first apartment, handwritten notes about furniture layouts, and small scribbles like "Claire loves this color" or "Move lamp closer to window" for her reading. For a moment, I almost tore it apart. Instead, I closed it gently and put it back on the shelf. Some memories deserve to exist, not as ghosts, but as proof that we once tried. The city itself became my therapy. I walked aimlessly through Boston, rediscovering places that had lost meaning during our marriage. The harbor at dawn, the library steps at dusk, the smell of rain on Tremont Street. Somewhere in those walks, I realized the world hadn't ended. It had just shifted. The horizon was still there, waiting for me to look up. Then came the invitations. A colleague asked me to give a talk at a design conference in New York about redefining personal spaces after emotional loss. I said yes, though I wasn't sure why. Standing on that stage months later, talking to strangers about balance, harmony, and rebuilding, I felt something click. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. The audience nodded, not because I was clever, but because they understood. Pain was a universal language. After that, more doors opened. Interviews, collaborations, exhibitions. The studio grew small but steady. I even started teaching workshops on minimalist design. People began calling me the guy who builds peace into rooms. If only they knew how much I had to lose to earn that title. But even as my career flourished, I stayed private. I didn't date. I didn't look for companionship. I wasn't ready to rebuild that part yet. Some nights, I still heard echoes of Claire's voice in my dreams. Soft, uncertain, asking for a chance I could never give. I'd wake up, breathe deeply, and remind myself, she made her choice, and I made mine. It took me nearly a year to understand that forgiveness isn't something you give the person who hurt you. It's something you give yourself, so the hurt finally stops running your life. And slowly, I began to forgive. Not her, me, for staying too long in a love that had already left. For believing that being needed was the same as being known. For mistaking silence for peace. By spring, the apartment was no longer just a place I slept. It was home. The shelves were full again, books, plants, sketches, pieces of life I had reclaimed. And in the quiet mornings when sunlight hit the wooden floor just right, I felt something almost impossible after so much wreckage. Hope. A year after the divorce, life no longer felt like an echo chamber. My studio had grown into a small, thriving business with 4 designers working under me. We had clients from New York to Portland, and somehow, my name had started appearing in magazines I used to admire from afar. It wasn't fame I wanted, it was the sense of building something honest, something entirely my own. Most mornings began the same way. Coffee by the window. The smell of cedar and linen from the furniture samples stacked by the wall. The river shimmering in the distance, like time itself moving steadily forward. Sometimes I'd pause to think about how long it had taken to get here, to this stillness that didn't feel empty anymore. One afternoon, while sorting through emails between client proposals, I saw her name, Claire Bennett. It took me a few seconds to process that it was real. The subject line was simple. I saw your photo in Architectural Digest. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. The message was short, almost painfully so. Ethan, I saw your studio feature. You look happy. I'm glad. I finally figured out who I am without you. And I hate what I found. Claire, no greetings, no questions, just that. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. The first read brought a pulse of old memories. Her laughter, her scent, the way she used to tuck her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The second read made me angry, not at her, but at how familiar the pain still felt. By the third read, the anger was gone, replaced by something quieter. Pity maybe, or closure. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my laptop and went for a walk. It was early evening, the air cool and soft. I passed the bookstore we used to visit on Sundays, the bench by the river where we once talked about moving to Maine, the little cafe where she loved the lemon tarts. Everything was still there, unchanged, but it didn't hurt anymore. It felt like walking through an old photograph, one that had finally lost its hold. At the edge of the bridge, I stopped to watch the city lights shimmer on the water. I thought about how life doesn't always give us the kind of endings we expect. Sometimes it gives us quieter ones, the kind that whisper instead of shout, the kind that let you breathe again. For years, I had believed that losing Claire was the end of my story. But standing there that night, I realized it was just the prologue to something else. I had learned that love, when it ends, doesn't have to leave ruin behind. It can leave space. Space to grow, to rediscover, to rebuild. When I got home, I deleted her message. Not out of spite, but out of peace. The kind of peace that comes only when the past no longer asks for your attention. Before bed, I walked through my apartment, the shelves, the sketches, the quiet hum of the city outside. I paused by the window, watching the lights dance across the water. The world was vast again, open and waiting. And for the first time in a long time, I whispered something into the silence. Not to Claire, not to the ghosts of what was, but to myself. I'm finally home.